The results of Wisconsin's 2018 election had to be seen to be believed. The state's controversial governor, Scott Walker, running for a third term in office after surviving a closely contested and high-profile recall effort in 2012 and securing a narrow re-election in 2014, faced off against the Democratic challenger Tony Evers, the state superintendent of public instruction. The election was expected to be a close one. The Cook Political Report rated the race as a toss-up. Both candidates were consistently polling within the margin of error. And prediction models, including Nate Silver's 538, had the contest ranked as one of the closest in the nation. At first blush, very little appears strange about the result. The challenger, Evers, eked out a narrow victory by almost 30,000 votes over the somewhat unpopular incumbent, a margin of slightly more than 1% of the nearly 2.7 million ballots that were cast. Yet peering beneath the surface reveals some disturbing abnormalities. Despite losing the popular vote overall, Walker somehow carried 63 of Wisconsin's 99 state assembly districts and 21 of the 33 state Senate districts. How could a candidate for governor win almost 2/3 of the districts in a state and still end up on the losing side? The answer to that question lies in what may go down as one of the most egregious instances of gerrymandering in American history. The battle over Wisconsin's legislative districts would play out in both the State House and the media, eventually reaching all the way to Washington, D.C., and a showdown before the 9 justices of the U.S. Supreme Court. What exactly is gerrymandering? The term has a certain elasticity to it that makes pinning down a concise and consistent definition of the underlying concept somewhat tricky. Writing in the early 20th century, Elmer Griffith, a University of Chicago PhD student whose treatise, The Rise and Development of the Gerrymander, may be among the most cited doctoral dissertations in history, defined the gerrymander thus: districts would not seem, therefore, to be gerrymandered unless they were established especially for election purposes and were formed intentionally in a particular manner for partisan advantage. As a working definition for the purposes of this book, Griffith's formulation is a good start, although perhaps a little more restrictive than I would like. Nevertheless, it serves as a decent jumping-off point for the discussion to come by laying out the 3 quintessential elements of the practice. Gerrymandering requires intent. One can point to all manner of examples of unfairness, inequality, and injustice in the electoral process that occurred naturally, by accident of history, or through the aggregation of individual decisions about where to live, whom to vote for, and what rules to follow. These are not gerrymanders. At its heart, gerrymandering involves a concerted effort to make the votes of certain groups of people matter more than the votes of others. It can be directed at an individual politician, at an entire political party, at voters in certain regions, or at those who hold specific political views. It is an effort to place a thumb on the scale of representative democracy, stacking the deck before an election has even taken place. Gerrymandering may not always be partisan, as Griffith's definition stipulates, but it is always political. Those crafting the gerrymander do so with some concrete political goal in mind. And, as is the case in criminal law, it's often the intent that is the most difficult element to prove. Just as criminal defendants and their attorneys may cook up seemingly innocuous or innocent explanations for their conduct, so too may perpetrators of gerrymandering cloak their actions in subterfuge, obfuscation, or deflection. Demonstrating corrupt intent in these instances can be challenging, although sometimes the circumstantial evidence of the gerrymander itself may be sufficient to carry the burden of proof. Other times, the actions of those responsible are documented in an exquisitely detailed paper trail, the conspiracy laid bare for the courts, the media, and the voting public to peruse at their leisure. And, like the criminal defendant whose lawyer labors in vain to prevent him from running his mouth, those in the business of gerrymandering have a tendency to want to brag about their exploits. These are the easy cases. To give but one high-profile example, when it comes to the recent gerrymander in Wisconsin, we have the receipts.